Everybody, this is SC Closer. Friends call me Vic, and this is another episode of Vic C Stories and Tall Tales. This episode, we talk about something that's a little bit funny, it's a little bit sad. It seemed kind of funny at the time, but then thinking back on it and everything, it was really kind of sad. I got a few stories like this. But I knew a guy, he was in the engineering department, he was an MM2. I won't say his name. I don't want to embarrass the guy in case he's listening or somebody might know who he's talking about. Anybody that served with me at the same time, you know who I'm talking about. He wasn't a bad guy. He was a machinist mate. I didn't really work with him. I assumed he knew what he was doing. I never heard anybody really say that he didn't know what he was doing. But he had a problem, and it was kind of described as having a button in his ass. And what was meant by that is evidently he was dealing with narcolepsy. And if he sat down, he would fall asleep. So what people would say is he had a button in his I'll just say button in his butt. And that, when he sat down, he'd sit down on that button, and that button closed his eyes, and he'd go to sleep. And he'd been in the Navy for some time. The story I was going to tell you about him is that I was at one point, and I guess I was in second class at this point, they had put me back in after steering, and I got qualified for the machinist mate, the hydraulic system. I got qualified for that. I was qualified for the electrical part, and I was qualified helmsman too, so I could steer the ship. So I got qualified for everything back there because I really liked being back there for general quarters, because we didn't have an officer back there at general quarters. And, and it was a decent place to be for restricted maneuvering and all. You had positive ventilation, and you just sat back there and talked on the phone and communicated and did stuff like that. And you were back there for an emergency. So anyway, they would send different machinist mates back there at different times. So they sent this guy back here, the second class, and they sent him back to after steering. And so he came back there, and I think we were at restricted maneuvering. And during restricted maneuvering, we do have an officer back there. And Mr. Acuna was back there this particular time. He was coming back there a lot. And I like Mr. Acuna. He was a good guy. And he was a warrant officer. And so anyway, we're back there. And Mr. Acuna told this MM2, and he said, look, he says, I don't want you falling asleep back here. He says, so you're not sitting down. He says, I want you to stay awake. He says, we're at restricted maneuvering, something could happen. You need to stay awake. He said, so stand up. He said, move around, do whatever. He said, but you're not sitting down. You're going to have to stand up. And so, MM2, said, okay, yes, sir, Mr. Kenya, I'll stand, So he was over here near me. I'm sitting in a chair, leaning it back, under catching the breeze and all from the ventilation and all. I got my headset on, and I'm on the 5JB circuit. I'm talking to main control and stuff. And I'm just sitting back there watching everything. And MM2 standing over here off to the side. And he's just standing there and he's looking around, and everything's just going along pretty good. And anyway, I'm just sitting back there watching the steering gears, and all this kind of stuff. And next thing I know, I hear a bam. And I look over, and the MM2's laying on the deck. And I'm like, what the hell happened? And he gets up. He had fallen asleep standing up. And then Mr. Cunha saw him fall. He comes over, and he's like, are you falling asleep standing up too? And he's like, yeah, and he couldn't really help it. I felt bad for him. I mean, since it was kind of funny, at the time, I was like, man, he fell asleep standing up. But it was a medical condition. And, so looking back at it, I felt kind of bad for him. But in any event, Mr. Kenya evidently talked to somebody, and he wasn't in after steering anymore after that. He's got to be a little more alert than that. And they sent back, I think it was MM3 head came back there. His name was Chad. Um, he might be watching. Somebody's watching that knows him. He was a good guy. He came back there, and the rest of the time I was on the ship, that was the team, me and him, and I forgot who the helmsman was. He was a tall fellow, but we were the team for the rest of the time I was on there. But yeah, that was a story. It's kind of funny, but it's kind of sad. And I call it, button in the butt.